Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frata Eleftheria, and tonight I'm going to be talking about a very popular area of magic, the area of talismanic magic. And I'm going to be kind of reverse engineering the whole area of talismanic magic. What is it about a talisman that makes it work? The theory behind talismans, and really focusing in on that tonight. So I want to just start by situating talismanic magic within the broader context of magic as it is kind of outlined in the Western esoteric tradition. So one of the classic books on ceremonial magic in Western esotericism is The Magus by Francis Barrett. I've got a hardback copy here that's quite nice. And as you can see, there's information in there about talismans, among other things. But Barrett goes into quite a bit of detail about lots of different forms of magic that we can have. There's the use of the properties of natural substances, so-called natural magic. There is the use of various forms of sympathetic magic, which can also overlap with the use of talismans, because it's about taking an item which represents something else in order to cause an effect on the thing that that item is representing. So the classic example of sympathetic magic using a representation to affect reality would be a voodoo doll. Talismans are a form of sympathetic magic where really you're trying to represent a desired outcome in the form of a physical object. And this can be distinguished from other forms of magic that Francis Barrett talks about, including enchantment, the use of fascination or glamour, such as a certain type of look, in order to affect a desired result in people. But of course, another form of magic is the use of words or invocations, words of power to affect a result. Again, can be distinguished from talismans in that talismans are a physical object, but talismans can also sometimes incorporate written words of power onto them to enhance their effect. And of course, ceremonial magic can overlap with a whole bunch of things, but is perhaps more formal and structured than the more naturalistic forms of magic. But ceremonial magic is quite often part and parcel with creating talismans, particularly if you're talking about books such as the Lesser and Greater Key of Solomon. You're supposed to create the talisman, and then there's also, other things that go into charging it, preparing it, and so forth, which are very ceremonial in nature. So we can narrow down talismanic magic as a form of magic within other forms, which is centered around the importance of the physical object, an object of power, which is the focus of the magical intent, and is also seen, it becomes, as a result of a magical working, the thing which then is the way that the particular intent of the ritual is broadcast out into the universe. So the area of talismanic magic is very related to charms and amulets. If you think of a lucky charm, such as a four-leaf clover, for example, or perhaps a lucky coin, which has gained some kind of significance based on a series of events which have effectively charged that, or a ritual which has given that coin significance that the others don't, such as is depicted in No Country for Old Men, in a sort of dark and twisted kind of a way. But there can be these ordinary objects that take on these magical properties because of what is done to them, the significance that we put into them, and that can be related to talismanic magic. But usually in ceremonial magic, Western ceremonial magic, when we're talking about talismanic magic, we're talking about creating a symbol with a bunch of different figures, letters and so forth on it, in order to capture a certain kind of intent and in order to attract a certain type of energy from the celestial spheres. So in, say, for example, the Keys of Solomon, the talismans are very much planetary in nature. different talismans for capturing the energy of different planets, and using symbols and words and a design that is congruous to that type of celestial energy, that this could be, in a sense, captured through that kind of sympathetic form of magic, of congruity between the energy, the spiritual energy, and what was being represented in the talisman. And so as a result of this, we also see often that in, say, Solomonic magic, a certain planetary talisman needs to be created at a certain time, because the energy of certain planets or certain zodiac signs is said to be more dominant at certain times. So that's the ideal time to channel that energy into a physical object. But really, at the core of the theory of talismanic magic is this idea of drawing down celestial energy into a physical object. And it is really about anchoring an intention, or anchoring a certain kind of magical force in a physical object. And it is that act of anchoring it that means it's able to work upon the physical world, where before it perhaps was too detached from the physical world, too dispersed to be able to do that. It's kind of like the way that energy is stored in a battery, so it can be used later, but rather than plugging that battery into a device, the talisman acts more like something that radiates that energy out to influence the universe directly with that energy. The kind of most archetypal kind of depiction of a talisman actually appears in the tarot. So there are 4 suits in a deck of tarot cards. The wands, the cups, the swords, and the pentacles. Each of these represents one of the 4 magical tools of the magician. And the magician is, of course, the first of the trumps, the first of the major arcana. And if you look particularly on the rider-waite deck, on the table of the magician, those 4 magical tools appear. And each of them has a significance, each of them has a meaning. The pentacle has its own meaning, and the pentacle represents the talisman. The pentacle, each of those 4 magical tools represents one of the 4 classical elements. The pentacle represents earth, and the whole suit of pentacles is all about bringing some kind of intention into physical manifestation. It's all about material abundance. It's all about growth and manifestation in the material world. Bringing something into the physical. And so this is very much what the pentacle, what the talisman tries to do. It's trying to give physical expression to an idea, an intention, an energy behind the magic. And it does that in 2 ways. First, in the form of the talisman being a physical representation of the will or intention of the magician. And the second way that it does that is by actually, as with all magic, bringing that intention into manifestation in the physical universe. And the talisman is a representation of that broader external manifestation, which is the intent of the working. And so in some magical sense, the existence, the mere existence of the talisman, the fact that it has been created purposefully for that intent, is encouraging, in some magical sense, encouraging that result to unfold in the physical universe. Again, it's that sympathetic magic kind of an idea. So I've spoken already a bit about congruence, the idea that whatever is on the talisman needs to be congruous with the type of energy that is being invoked, often grouped as one of the 7 planetary energies. And you will create a planetary talisman for a given planet, depending on what kind of desire you want to manifest, with different planets presiding over different types of effect in the physical world. So what exactly are the signifiers that need to appear on a particular talisman in order to kind of physically represent a certain type of energy. Well, the way that it's done in, Western ceremonial magic that's come down to us today is through the use of certain god names, which correspond to a particular planet, the use of the names of angels that correspond to a particular planet, the use of planetary symbols. It can involve the use of Bible verses which relate to the specific intent of a particular working. These are all the sorts of things that we see appearing in the Pentacles of Solomon, in the Greater Key of Solomon. And the letters of words usually appear in Hebrew or some other magical alphabet, which is a variation of Hebrew or a stylized version of Hebrew, or just a substitution of Hebrew for a made-up alphabet. And then you might have some geometric figures in there, which may or may not hold some significance in terms of sacred geometry and number. But what you're left with is the talisman. And another technique that the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn added to the creation of talismans was this idea of flashing colours. That, each planet had a particular colour, and if you colour the talisman in that colour plus its opposing colour on the colour wheel, it creates this really vivid kind of flashing effect, which seems to make the talisman more magical. And it also has the corresponding colour of a planet, adding to the overall symbolism sort of represented in the talisman. And if you're wondering what colour, what god name, what angel, etc. corresponds to a particular planet, there's lots of tables of correspondence out there that can show you that. Most notably the tables in Liber 777, perhaps the most famous example of that, where you can just look for a Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, which also often is a planet, and then you just follow the columns to see what incense represents that planet, what colour, what god names, etc. And that is sort of what goes into crafting a talisman. It's kind of like, you're encoding a chip with certain digital information. That's the particular type of energy that you're drawing down into the talisman. But of course, in order to store encoded information, you need to have certain types of circuitry on the microchip that will allow that storage to happen. And that's where the kind of figures and symbols of the talisman come in. And if you've ever looked up close under a microscope at what a microchip looks like, it certainly looks like something out of a medieval grimoire. It certainly looks talismanic in its own right. And maybe there's something to that. So what is it exactly that makes a talisman work? I mean, that we've covered the theory of creating a talisman, why it should work, but what actually is the process that is behind putting all of that into action and making the talisman effective? There's the traditional magical view that it's all about universal energies and capturing those and then using them, as I've outlined. But perhaps there is also another explanation that we can have, a psychological explanation. Much as with other forms of magic, there's in recent times been a psychologizing of certain magical techniques to try and come at a psychological understanding or explanation for why these things work, because they do work. No one really understands why. That's not to discount that there might be something more supernatural at play, but it can help to think about these things in a psychological way. So a talisman can work because it's basically like we convince ourselves that we will act differently in the world and attract different outcomes to ourselves. If only we have an object with us. Sometimes faith is not enough. Human beings need something tangible to make it believable. And so we say, well, you know, I will represent my belief that I will have a different outcome in the world in the form of this object. And as long as I carry this around, I can rest assured in the belief that things are going to work out differently for me. And it really does work. It's like a, you know, you could say, if you're a real skeptic, that it's like a placebo effect, that even though the object itself is meaningless, the mere fact that you have invested belief that carrying that object around is going to help you in some way will in turn help you. Of course, the very notion of the placebo effect is by definition magical, in my opinion, because it's using pure intent to affect a result that would not otherwise have been affected. But you know, it's a way of psyching yourself up, and it's a way of encouraging yourself when nothing else in the ordinary world will suffice to help you do that. You know, it's like in the Lord of the Rings movie, the second one, The Two Towers, at the Battle of Helm's Deep, when you know, all of the young boys need to come out to help fight against the orcs because they're so outnumbered, and there's a character who, you know, this young boy who's got a really dreadful sword. It's not a good sword at all, and he's saying, you know, the men are saying there's no hope, and Aragorn is with him, and he takes the sword and he swings it around. It really is a piece of junk, but then Aragorn says, "This is a good sword, and there's always hope." And the very act of doing that has transformed that sword into a talisman, and it's a talisman that will cause success in battle, where before it was just a hopeless fight. So that's an example of how talismans can work. And you know, that example of Aragorn swinging the sword around and saying it's a good sword, it's an example of a ritual to consecrate a talisman, where an ordinary object is transformed into an extraordinary object through a series of words and gestures to make it seem more real to our subconscious minds. You know, if we act something out, if we perform something, then our unconscious mind believes that it really is happening. And, you know, when we go on a flight simulator and we simulate flight, we can learn how to fly a real plane. And so by visualizing our success, we bring it about. And we give ourselves an extra help with that, with talismans, by vesting that power in a physical object that we can carry around with us. So it's not just an abstract thought that we have. And there might be another level to it. I'm not discounting that. And there may be certain types of objects which, by their very nature, have special properties, kind of like the natural magic idea. You know, crystals or gemstones might be an example of this. You know, there are people who are quite knowledgeable on crystals and what each different type of crystal does intrinsically. I don't have that kind of knowledge. I haven't learnt it thus far. But, you know, that is an example of an object that can be powerful. But again, talismans, we're usually talking about something which we've constructed for an express purpose of harnessing that power, and then called the power into it from outside. But it is a very popular form of magic, and a very striking form of magic, because, you know, you can see the magic in front of you. It's you know, everything that you're trying to do is represented in a cool little symbol, which has made talismanic magic really endure as a form of magic that people like to use even into the present day. And I hope that this video has been informative in terms of giving you some of the basics around talismanic magic. And if you did enjoy this video, please leave a like down below, subscribe to this channel to support my work. If you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below, and feel free to leave any comments that you might have. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.